Um, Sorry about that. Thanks, Ronnie. Um, yeah, great question. Yeah, most of the kids that we're going to work with and serve in families together haven't had as traumatic of experiences in kids in foster care. It doesn't mean they haven't suffered any trauma, but I guess we could say the likelihood or probability is lower, though it's not impossible that you might have a kid. I mean, my own kids, we got holes here. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. You could come into our house, be like, James, why is that hole? It's right outside my office. There's a door that's got a hole in it. Why? It's because my son, who has some sensory processing disorder, he just got tested for diabetes this week. And so we know that he might have some blood sugar problems. And when he doesn't eat or drink, man, hair trigger. So it's like, that could be any kid, and especially if they're in an environment where they're not familiar, or something sets them off. So it's not impossible, but it's just not as likely as kids who are already in foster care. But great question. Ronnie, did you want to add anything? Ronnie would be the one, who's talking to the parents and would be getting that information, and kind of doing those, intake / screening questions of how are your kids, how do they respond to ABC, XYZ, and getting all that. But do you have anything you want to add there, Ronnie?
No, the only thing that I will be asking, like James said, I'm going to be checking and taking the intake and learning all of the details about the child that I can. And the parents are usually pretty open about behaviors. Things that I'm going to ask are, what triggers your child? What kinds of things are going to make your child upset? So that you have that list, and we worked with a mom recently, a mom, not a child, but a mom recently, who made it very, very clear that you do not say calm down to her. Absolutely do not use that word. Don't. And one day while I was communicating with her, she was going through some very strong emotional situations. She had a death in a family, close friend. She called me, and she was very calm. Don't use that word, right? Don't say that word. And I told her, I said, you are handling this so well. I'm so proud of how calmly you are talking to me. Now, I said it in such a positive tone, and she immediately said, do not use that word with me. If our parents know what's triggering them, they also know usually what triggers their child. Then they also often have some things that they use that the child is already used to that will help calm them down. So you will get a list of what are the things that specifically trigger them, so you're aware, and what's mom's method for calming down might not be as effective or as scientifically useful as the TBRI stuff, because our parents a lot of times are not as in tune with things like getting them a drink of water, make sure their blood sugar is good, and being in eye contact with them, and touching and those kinds of things. But they have tools that the child is also used to. So we're going to get you as much information as we can about these kids before you get them.
Great. The other thing I wanted to mention about last week's assignment with the care community activity sheet, that's something we'll connect with you on at some point, personally, individually. For myself and Brian Barrier, we're working with churches, your churches, to help develop that care community, but we also want you guys to be a part of it too, because people that we don't know. You're connected to them through friendships, Bible studies, classes, small groups, all the things, neighborhoods, whatever, whoever they are. And we want you to have the privilege of including those people in what God's calling you to do. And so at some point we'll connect with you. Want to make sure that you at least did it. So if you didn't do that last week, we'd love for you to do it this week. And again, just brainstorm, okay, who's in my life that I can invite into this? Or think specifically about you, Susan, like if you're thinking of being an advocate, who are some other people who could be advocates? Or who are some other people who may not host, but man, they have free time, or they have resources available for things like diapers and bottles or clothes or whatever, or maybe they love to drive around town. Like, who are the people in my life that I can, invite into what God's doing um, in this ministry that I'm a part of? So we'll connect with you on that in the future. Okay, well, let's get into our training for tonight. I'll share my screen here. And we'll start off with child safety awareness. Y'all see that? Get a thumbs up from somebody. Great. And since I'm sharing my screen, I'm going to minimize. I'm not going to be able to see your faces. So speak up if you want me to stop, slow down, or repeat something. Again, this is being recorded, so it'll be online. We're going to start with child safety preparedness or awareness, and then we'll get into self-care. So we're going to talk first about keeping your home safe. And so if you've had any interaction with foster care, some of this stuff will be very familiar to you. Or if you know friends who've had to do foster care, there is some overlap with keeping your home safe and welcoming kids in to your house. So what we're going to talk about is chemicals, medications, and weapons here to start. So this is like super exciting stuff, right? Like, it's just super straightforward, kind of nuts and bolts. Here's some things you need to do to prepare your home to welcome kids. I will say, as we start out, we have tried, our team has tried to make the preparation for you to welcome children in and host them as simple as possible. The Hatchers aren't on the call. They've done foster care. Are they licensed, Libby? Right? Sorry, I can't see you, so I don't know if you're nodding or not.
They are not licensed. Not. They've done respite.
They've done respite
for foster care.
So they've done respite. They're probably a little more familiar with the foster care guidelines, and there's some really rigorous guidelines you have to meet for child safety in your house. And so we've tried to eliminate that, because this is a volunteer program where the church is stepping up to say, we're going to care for kids. We're also going to do it safely, but wisely and prudently. And we want to treat kids the way we would treat our own kids or neighbor kids or cousins or whatever, that as we welcome them into our home. So there's a little bit of a difference there. For example, my favorite example, if you're a foster parent in Nebraska, you have to have a fence around your pool. And I don't mean a fence around the yard that the pool is located in. I mean around the pool. So that's like a weird thing, right? We're not going to make a comment about whether that's a great thing or a bad thing. That's up for the state to decide. We're not going to make you build a fence around your pool if you welcome kids into your home. So really extreme example. But what we're going to focus on when we do your home visit, your home inspection, is these three things: chemicals, medications, and weapons. So we'll just get through these really quick. So household cleaners and other chemicals. Really, we want you to have those out of reach or in a locked cabinet. Child safety lock is totally fine if you have them under the sink, or just put them up in a cabinet in your in your laundry room. They don't have to be in a safe. They don't have to be, in some far off recess of your house where nobody can get to. Just, again, do what you would do wisely, prudently with your own family. Take special care of garage chemicals. That's something we probably forget about often. And by garage chemicals, I mean things like gasoline, Drano. I have stuff for my mainline pipes that I use often, and it could kill you, right? Like it's essentially poison. Well, it is up so high that unless a child like got a ladder to get up there, and I would know that they're getting a ladder, right, to get up there, it's in my garage and out of the way. And so that kind of stuff. So again, same thing, just up, out of the way. If you are a little nervous, go ahead and lock them in a cabinet with a padlock if you want to do that. But just take special care of your garage chemicals and things that you use for around the house or in the yard. All right, prescription and over-the-counter medicines. Biggest thing is they just need to be off the countertops. And I know some people, keep their medicine on their countertops. So that's going to be something we check for. Off the countertops where a kid can't get to it, put them up and out of reach. If you do host middle to upper elementary or older children, you could consider them locking them away if you want, like in a box, a lunch pail with a lock on it. You don't have to do that. But again, that's kind of like what your comfort level is. If you're like, okay, I'm hosting older kids, maybe I should lock them up. We'll leave that up to you. For most people, if you have a bathroom in your bedroom, and no one goes in your own bedroom and bathroom, probably your medicine cabinet is okay. And so again, just off the countertops, out of reach. If it's a prescription medicine and you don't want anybody to get a hold of it, and you need some ideas or creativity on what to do with that, we can work with you. We just want to make sure that it's up and out of reach. And if you're hosting small children, little kids, like they're not going to be able to get to that anyway if it's in a cabinet. This is the big one: firearms and other weapons. This is going to be consistent with what foster parents do with the state. They need to be stored in a safe or a locked room. And so not a safe room or a locked room. Grammar kind of matters there, so I messed that one up. But in a safe or in a locked room. So ammunition, same thing. It needs to be stored separately from the firearm, in a different room, not just preferably in a different room. So cross that out in your mind. But also either in a safe or in a locked room. It just needs to be separate from the firearms. I've talked to our risk and facilities manager about this stuff. He grew up in the country on a farm. He loves hunting. And he's like, hey, if hunting is a host family's thing, like, and the parent that we're serving is good with it, like, and you want to like do that as a bonding activity, our risk officer was like, I would love that for the kids that we host. And so if that's a thing for you, great. We can work with you and work with the parents to make sure they're okay with that. But we want to make sure that the way that you store your firearms and your ammunition is to this standard. And the other thing is other weapons. So knives, swords. Some people have like knife collection, right? That also needs to be stored in a safe or a locked room. So that's pretty straightforward. And so these are kind of like non-negotiable things. So we're not going through your house, making sure that you have a fence around your pool, or that, you have a certain number of square footage or whatever. But these things are safety issues that we want to make sure we're doing wisely and prudently. So any questions on chemicals, medications, or weapons? Okay.
You can't see the heads shaking, but they were shaking their heads no.
Great. All right. Well, now we'll talk about suicide awareness, as it kind of fits under the banner of child safety preparedness. I'll start off with this little introduction, because like we mentioned earlier, most of the children that you're going to work with haven't suffered trauma to the level that kids in foster care have suffered. That doesn't mean they haven't suffered trauma. It doesn't mean they haven't been around people who are depressed or have mental illness or have thought about suicide. The goal of this program obviously is to prevent trauma from happening, and by hosting children before abuse and neglect happen. However, you still might interact with a child who has been exposed to suicide, has had conversations about suicide, or has thought about killing themselves. And so we want to prepare you for that. I will say also, what we're going to talk about for the next probably 20 minutes or so is honestly just good training to have as a human being. I've taken a suicide prevention training 3 times, once here at Christian Heritage with our risk officer. Our whole team did it a couple weeks ago. And then I've taken 2 through the University of Nebraska. And the amount of information that I learned was just invaluable. And actually was able to use it in a conversation with a college student. And I was just thankful that I had language to be able to have the conversation. And so hopefully this will just be good for you in life. Maybe you've had a suicide prevention training before, and some of this, it'll be old hat for you. That's totally fine. But we're going to put it in the context of kids and talk. How do you talk about it with kids? And then we'll show you some statistics here. So we're gonna start with suicide myth or fact. So a little participation. So I'm not gonna be able to see you, but I want you to turn on your microphone so you can give your feedback. We're going to talk about suicide statistics and then suicide prevention. How do you actually engage with somebody who's struggling and thinks that the answer is to commit suicide? All right. All right. So myth or fact. So here, I need you to turn on your microphones. Libby and Ronnie, you probably know the answers. Jen, you probably know the answers too, but you can play along as well. So is this a myth or a fact? Talking about suicide or asking someone if they feel suicidal will encourage suicide attempts. Is that a myth or is that a fact?
Myth.
Myth.
Myth across the board. Yeah, that's a myth. It's actually a good thing to talk to people about what they're feeling, what they're thinking, like most things, right? But sometimes we want to say, oh, I don't want to put an idea in their head. If you're thinking about it, chances are they've already thought about it. And they're waiting for somebody, as we'll talk about later, they're waiting for somebody to engage with them. All right, myth or fact? Most people who are suicidal do not want to die. Is that a myth or a fact?
Fact.
It's always great when somebody's courageous to say first, right? Yeah, fact. Some people who are suicidal do want to die, but most of them, studies show, are not. They don't, and some of them, the younger they are, also the finality of death hasn't set in. And so they don't actually want to end their life. All right, myth or fact? Most suicidal individuals plan their attempt in advance and give clues that it will happen.
Fact.
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 Yep, fact. It's usually not, hardly ever, a spur of the moment thing, or somebody says, oh, I'm just going to end it now. It's been thought through. And we'll talk about the clues that you notice, that you can notice when somebody is suicidal. All right, myth or fact? There is a typical profile for a person who may attempt suicide: gender, race, age, financial status, etc.
Myth.
Myth.
Yep, total myth. Suicide affects people across all socioeconomic statuses, both races, any age, or excuse me, both genders, any race. It doesn't matter across the board. All right, myth or fact? People who attempt suicide and survive will not attempt suicide again.
Myth.
Yeah, myth. People often attempt suicide multiple times. And as we'll see, it's often in order to communicate a desire for help. They're looking for help. Okay, myth or fact? I think we have two more here. There is a correlation between drugs and alcohol and suicide. Oh, he's given his answer. It's a tough one. There is a correlation between drugs and alcohol and suicide.
Fact.
Yeah, they're brave souls.
Fact.
Yeah, it is a fact. It's a fact because drug and alcohol is often used because it puts people at ease, right? And it allows them to get relaxed in order to do what they think they need to do. Oh, now we have a couple more, I think. Okay, all young people who are with thoughts of suicide are depressed. Myth or fact?
Myth.
I'd say myth.
Yeah, myth. Many are, but not every single one. All right, myth or fact? Suicide can be prevented. This would be a terrible training if this wasn't a fact, right? Yeah, total fact. Suicide can be prevented. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But first, I want to give you some suicide statistics. When I was doing this research, I'm not going to lie, like it was overwhelming, right? It felt overwhelming. And so I just want to prepare you for that. Maybe you've been affected by suicide. Maybe it's been a family member or somebody close. Or maybe it's been somehow tangentially connected to you. So when you see statistics like this, it might be a little triggering. So I just want to prepare you for that. Well, we're just going to look at stats for kids ages 5 to 14. Some of you might be taking in kids younger than that. There's maybe a chance you take in, somebody older, 14 to 18. But we're going to look at kind of the bulk of the kids that we're going to serve in that 5 to 14 age.
Hey, James.
Yeah.
Quick question before you start, just to put it into context.
Yeah.
Are these statistics pre-COVID or after COVID?
We're going to look at statistics really over the last 20 years, but we do have some for 2020 and 2021. Okay.
I just know that like with COVID
Totally.
hitting, all those stats just skyrocketed as well. So I was just kind of curious.
No, yeah, you're totally right. And I'd have to confirm, I think actually suicide went down a little bit in 2021. I'm trying to look at the graph in my brain, but then uptick again 2020, but then 2021 maybe went up a bit. I'll try to find that. I don't think I have that on a slide here. So suicide is the second leading cause of death for children aged 10 to 14. When you think about that, that's pretty amazing. Like it's mind-boggling, actually. So second leading cause of death for children aged 10 to 14. The rate and accidents, by the way, are number one, typically car accidents. The rate for this age group, and that's 5 to 14, has increased since 2007. So suicide for that age group every year since 2007 has increased. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death for children aged 5 to 9. Now, I have 2 kids in that age bracket. And when I think about that, it almost leaves me speechless. I'm like, I couldn't imagine a world where kids in that age group would want to take their life. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, and from preparing for this and doing the research ahead of time, a lot of kids in that 5 to 9 age bracket have been exposed to suicide in some way, but they don't understand the finality of death. And I even find that when I talk with my own kids, right? My son is really into Star Wars. And so we talk about Star Wars, and people die in Star Wars, right? And so he understands death kind of at a conceptual level, but he doesn't know that, like, if you die, like that's it. And that's typical for a kid in that age range, is they don't understand that you get one shot at life. So 10th leading cause of death is for ages 5 to 9. Rates for the 5 to 9 age group specifically have increased 15% per year since 2013. So that's a pretty dramatic increase over the last 9 years. Firearms are used in 1/3 of child suicide, and it's typically a firearm that is in the home. And that's why, that's one of the main reasons why we say, hey, we want you to keep your firearm and your ammunition separate, locked away, so that kids don't have access to that. You can go to the CDC visualization tool for more statistics. It's actually a pretty cool website, how they put that together, and how you can look at all different filters and learn about this kind of stuff. All right, so here's a graph of the trends for the last 20 years. And so that's why Aaron and I said we have data from 2020. I don't think it's actually updated from 2021. So I was wrong. So I do have this graph. So in 2019, for ages 10 to 14, suicides were down. So in the United States, there were just under 550 suicides for kids ages 10 to 14, but that did tick up in 2020 to 581. For kids 5 to 9, it's been mostly between 10 to 20 a year. So that's not a lot number wise, but I mean, we know, as you know, that age group is like, it should be 0, right? Our heart for kids would be that number is 0, but it was 20 in 2020. So here's a number, 34,348. And that's the years of the potential loss of life based on a 70-year lifespan in 2020 for kids ages 5 to 14. So think about that. In 2020 alone, 34,348 potential years were lost because of suicide. Since 2001, that's 402,948 years of potential life that's been lost due to suicide, just for kids ages 5 to 14. And that's why suicide prevention is so important. It's so vital. That's why all of us need to be able to know, again, not just for, I'll say this again, not just for like hosting, not just for families together, but in life, how do we talk to people about this issue that, as a, you know, Midwestern kid from a, you know, conservative home, like, I don't really want to talk about. How can we engage, and how can we have that conversation in a really empathetic but informed way, to meet people where they're at, to love them, and ultimately to help them. So one more statistic here. These are percentage of middle school kids who have admitted to having suicidal thoughts. This is back in 2019. So Aaron, I couldn't find this for 2020 because I knew what you were talking about, and I looked, and unfortunately we're just behind with getting statistics in from 2020, 2021. But in 2019, a quarter of 8th graders admitted to, at some point, seriously thinking about killing themselves. 21% for 7th graders and 19% for 6th graders. My oldest daughter is going into 6th grade this year. And I know, like, middle school can be a scary place. And we've had conversations with other parents about middle school. And there's going to be kids that you host in that middle school range, right? That 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. And they may not be in this 19 to 25%, but they know people who are, because 1 out of 4 kids in their class have thought about it. And so that means they're talking about it. They're Snapchatting about it. And I said that wrong, Snapchatting about it and TikToking about it, right? That's what kids talk about. And so you need to know the gravity of it and the scale of it. All right, we'll now kind of transition to talking about suicide awareness and prevention. So let's start with 3 common reasons teens admit to suicidal feelings. First is they feel this great pain and a true desire to die. Like, they do want to end it. And what this means is they want to escape. And so that's really the root of their feeling. They want to escape. Number 2, they're trying to manipulate outcomes in their life. They want control. And so they think if they can even put on a front, or I will commit suicide, or they talk that way, so they want control of their life and maybe even other people in their life. And then 3, they're trying to communicate their need for help. They feel hopeless. And maybe they don't have the words to communicate it. Maybe they don't exactly know how to understand their emotions. As a staff team, we were talking about the movie Inside Out. It's a Disney movie, and if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's one of my favorite Disney movies. Basically, it follows this girl, Riley, and there's all these emotions in her head. And you realize, as time goes on, we need all of our emotions. The hard part is, as we find out in the movie, just even expressing emotions. And so for some kids, they express it through I want to kill myself. I want to end my life. They feel hopeless, and they don't know another way to tell an adult that. or even their own friends. So escape, control, and hopelessness are often the reasons teens admit to suicidal feelings. All right, so the rubric we're going to use to talk about suicide prevention, look at my time here, is REACH. And I'm really adapting this from, again, a REACH training that UNL provides, with just a few little tweaks here and there. So REACH, each letter stands for something. R is recognize. Recognize the warning signs. Some of the triggers for suicidal feelings could be a breakup, could be loneliness and isolation, social issues. Kids may be bullied at school, music, hopelessness, a desire for control. We just talked about those two. An unstable family history, relationship loss. So again, if you're getting into that older, middle school or even high school, it could have been the result of a relationship that ended. Family conflict, or environment and family history. And we're going to kind of double click on this one here. But these are really the big triggers that, again, not just kids, but anybody, an adult, could feel and have that oh, maybe I should end it, right? And so these are some things that if they gain too much traction in your mind and your heart, could make people feel like the solution is I should commit suicide. So let's look at environment and family history really quick. Suicide behavior can be learned or imitated, and any activities that sensationalize or draw undue attention to suicide can increase the likelihood of or suicide contagion among youth. And so if a family member or somebody that's dearly loved talks a lot about it, sensationalize it, if they commit suicide, a child might think, that's a part of my family. Like maybe that's my lot in life. That's what we do. So the environment is an enormous part, an enormous trigger for kids who are suicidal. There's growing evidence that familial and genetic factors contribute to the risk for suicidal behavior. I could send you some of those studies that I came across, but it just plays into the idea that environment and family history is incredibly shaping in the life of kids. And so again, we'll screen for that. We'll do a screening, a suicide screening when families come to us and say, hey, we would like to request a hosting. And so obviously we will let you know about that and let you know if there's suicide in the family history or if a child's ever had any kind of suicidal thinking before. That's not something we're going to ask you to do, but we'll do it beforehand so that you know. And just as a side note, if you're uncomfortable with that, if you're like, I can't do that right now, I can't care for that kid, please communicate that with us. We want to know. There's no shame, there's no guilt in saying, I'm not ready for that. And that's totally fine. All right, let's look at some behavioral warning signs. And we're just going to kind of go through these really quick. A child may be making threats, draws a right about suicide. There could be a sudden change in behavior. They might avoid friends or avoid enjoyable activities. There could be growing depression and shutting people out from their true feelings. This is a key one, suddenly giving away precious possessions. So say that you have a child that came into your home, say they're 10, and they have a prized baseball glove. Like they love this baseball glove. And all of a sudden they wrap it up and they give it to one of your children. That would be a big red flag to me, because that was your thing when you came into my house, but now you want to give it away. They do that because they care for things and they want other people to care for things when they know their life is going to end. This is probably more so for older kids or especially adults. But again, if a child learned that from a family member or a friend, they can repeat that behavior. Someone may be preoccupied with death. They may have a sudden elation or feeling of peace because they know that their life is going to end. Again, this would be more on the middle school or high school aged, because they sense that finality is coming and it's all going to be over. If someone's under a lot of pressure or stress or abuse, neglect or loss, if someone becomes angry for no reason, and it's probably, again, the overwhelming stress they might feel, knowing what they're going to do, and their body, their mind, their heart not really knowing how to cope with that. If they begin to use alcohol or drugs or other high-risk behaviors. Now, here's the progression of suicidal behavior. This is really simple. Starts with thoughts, moves to self-harm, then it moves to attempts, and then to completion. I did leave a stage out. Some people use the phrase suicidal gestures. It's actually I learned a very controversial phrase in the literature. And so I kind of put that in with self-harm, which could be anything from cutting your wrist in a way that it's not going to kill you. It could be other kinds of self-harm, not eating, not drinking, refusing to obey safety rules because you don't really care about your life. So it could be any kind of things that don't lead to death. But then somebody who's committed to taking their life will get to the point where they will actually try to commit suicide through attempts. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second before we move on. These last few ones will go rather quickly here in the last 10 minutes. Any questions, any thoughts, anything you need to share at this point?
James, if I can just
Yep.
share. So I didn't share my intro, but I've been a licensed mastered social worker
Yep.
For over 20 years and worked in several different settings and environments with children. One really, really big thing that we're seeing is children kind of cries for help on social media. Social media is playing a big factor in things right now too. And so, you know, a lot of times it's just kind of keeping tabs on those kiddos and what social media devices, you know, and apps they're using. And maybe even if they're in your home, you know, setting rules and boundaries on those. The schools are very much aware of that and work in close relation with parents and caregivers as well to help identify based on, you know, some kids posting you know, bold statements and threats and stuff like that on social media.
That's super helpful. Yeah, basically look for any of those warning signs or triggers on social media, because that's going to be where that's communicated. That's great.
I think in some of the material at some point I read will be mandatory reporters. So who do we have to report this to, like you guys or to the Department of Health and Human Services?
Yep. Yeah, you would. Go ahead, Libby.
Yeah, so first, I mean, like in the realm of reporting, if you think that a kid is suicidal, for sure call us and we can walk you through steps of what to do. In the realm of mandated reporting too, if you are like, oh, this child is experiencing abuse that none of us knew about, right? That's also a mandated reporter situation. Call us and talk to us first, because it might be something, right, where it's like you heard part of it and we've heard the whole story or know this whole story of what happened, and can fill in gaps before we make a CPS call. But we will definitely direct you if a CPS call needs to be made, and we can do that call with you if that's something that has to happen.
Okay.
Great. All right. Well, hopefully we can answer some of the questions here about how do you engage with a child, or again, I just keep reiterating, anybody that you know, because this is going to happen at some point. You're going to have these kind of conversations, whether it's with a friend, someone from church, or a child you're hosting. So recognize warning signs. E is engage with empathy. What we want to do here is we want to ask and we want to validate. How are you doing? And if they generalize, here's the phrase that I love to use for any life situation. Can you tell me more about that? Tell me more. Oh, school is really hard. Tell me more. And ask and say the phrase, tell me more, until they say, shut up and don't say that again. But just very gently say, can you tell me more about that? Well, my teacher yelled at me today. Oh, what happened? Can you tell me more? So we want to ask them how they're doing and just engage with them. And we want to validate. We want to validate their feelings. You want to affirm their love for them. I could see how that would be really hard. Oh, I probably would have responded the same way you would have there. You want to affirm them. Don't guilt them. Don't shame them. You want to affirm the way that they're feeling, because the way they're feeling is the way that they're feeling. Kids can, we all know kids can blow things way out of proportion. But one thing I'm learning as a parent is just to meet them where they're at and go, man, that seems really hard right now. I'm so sorry that you're dealing with that. How can I help you? Tell me more about that. And so that's what we're doing when we're engaging. Now we want to ask direct questions. So when we're engaging, we're asking questions just to see how they're doing. Again, we're empathizing with them. We're affirming our love for them. But now we're going to ask direct questions. And if you get to the point after you've engaged and you get the sense that, no, they are suicidal, like they are thinking about killing themselves. They've given me either clues or explicit answers. I just think the world would be better off without me. I think I want to kill myself, right? And so don't beat around the bush, right? This is not the time for like Nebraska nice and like, oh, I kind of want to ask the question, but don't ask the question. Here's how I've been trained to ask the question, and I want you to do it. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And the reason we put it that way is because little kids don't know some of them don't know what suicide means. They don't even know the word, but they do know killing. Or you could say, do you have plans to kill yourself? Because again, as we pointed out earlier, the research shows us people who do attempt suicide often have a plan in place. Never say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? So that's a question you don't want to ask. And the reason is because suicide in their mind is the answer to their hurt. So if you say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? They're like, are you kidding me? I am hurting. Like my life is terrible. And I want to end the pain. And so that's why just be very direct. You can be gentle. You can be gracious. Say, are you thinking about killing yourself? So a couple years ago, I took this training at the University of Nebraska. I used to be a campus minister there. And then I go downstairs in the union and I see a gal who's a part of our ministry. And I know that she was dealing with anxiety, like pretty significant anxiety. And so we're talking and she just seems like Eeyore, like, and it is just not good for her. And I'm like, I was just at this training, but I've never been so afraid to ask like a 20-year-old girl a question in my life. And I'm like, I just looked at her, I said her name, and I said, are you thinking about killing yourself? And she said, oh no, but thank you for asking me. And she's like, I'm not. But she just felt cared for in the moment that I asked her. And then I said, okay, thank you. I said, I just came from this training and I had to ask you this question. And then we had a good conversation and she was able to work through some of the things that she was going through. But again, with somebody who's going through the hurt, you don't want to say, oh, you think about hurting yourself, because to them, what they're going through is what hurts. Okay, now we're at C, communicate love and hope. You want to use positive, hope-filled language as you're talking to, again, either a child or a elementary, middle, high school, or an adult. Positive, hope-filled language. So I want you to live, not I don't want you to die. Use the positive. Say, I want you to live. Like, I love you. I appreciate you. I see this about you. Whatever. Positive, hope-filled language. I am here for you, not it'll all be okay. The reality is you don't know if it'll be okay. You don't know all the details of their life or the future. So never say it'll be okay. Something I learned when I was a pastor is Romans 8:28, which is, that all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose, right? It's always true, but you don't always need to say it. It's always true, but you don't always need to say it. So meet people where they're at and say, I'm here for you. And I think of Jesus here, right? Jesus didn't come to tell us, hey, it's all going to be okay. But he came and he's like, I'm with you and I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. And so be there for them. And that's one way that you communicate love and hope to somebody who is hurting. And then don't leave them alone. If you're in a situation, so Jennifer, just like you just asked, like, what do we do? Like, don't leave them alone. If it's with the kid, maybe there is a chance that you could be with the parent of the child that you're serving and you're hosting. And maybe you're doing family time and they came over to visit their kids, or maybe you met them at a park, or maybe they came to church and you're out to lunch after and you're talking. And all of a sudden things go downhill fast. And you're at this point where you're talking about this, either that then or later in the day. Just don't leave them. Keep talking to them and tell them, I'm here for you. The rest of your schedule at that point doesn't really matter. Like, that person in front of you is what matters. And so that then moves to the last stage, help them access the care. You don't have to have all the answers. You're going to contact the appropriate people to help them. And so you're going to call 911 if it's an emergency. If you notice, that they are, like, they need to go to the hospital right now, you're going to call 911. If you find someone who had attempted suicide, you're going to call 911. If you have to err on the side of caution, you can call 911. It's okay. And you could go with them to the hospital. Obviously, if it's a child, you're going to go with them. And then one of us is going to meet you there. And the parent of that child is going to meet you there. Call Christian Heritage after you call 911. So don't call us before you call 911, because Libby or Ronnie is going to say, call 911. But after you call 911, call us. And again, we'll walk you through what to do. Then again, the emergency situation would be there's been a suicide attempt, or this person needs to get to the hospital immediately. They need serious mental help and support right now, today, and we need to get them to the hospital. We will talk to the parents. So if you're not talking to the parent, if it's about the child you're hosting, Ronnie will be the one, or Susan, or any one of our trained advocates. They'll be the ones to talk to the mom and dad and say, here's the situation. Can I come get you? Like to take you to the hospital where your child is right now. We want to go see him or her and be with them, right? And so we don't expect you to have to do that. So an advocate will do that. You just worry about the child.
James, can I interrupt really
Please
quick?
do. Yeah, I think we're basically done.
If there's a situation with a child where they will agree to go to the hospital with you instead of you having to like have them ride in an ambulance, that means that they feel safe with you. And if that's something that you're
That's
willing
good.
to do, then you can drive them to the hospital. So I've had an instance before, and again, keep in mind, this was a foster child who had experienced a large amount of trauma. And he had been very escalated. The fire truck and the ambulance were called for a whole slew of reasons, and he did not want to ride in the ambulance or with the police officer, but agreed that he would ride in the car with me to the hospital, right? Like the police officer met us there to make sure that we were safe. They followed behind us. That's an extreme scenario. But a lot of times if they're feeling safe with you, they'll agree to get in the car with you to get help.
Yeah, and I should add too, if it's an older child or the parent, you might need to persuade them that it's a good thing to go to the hospital. There's actually another suicide prevention training called QPR, which stands for question, persuade, refer. And the referring part is the referring them to a professional, but the P part is the persuading that, once they're suicidal, I'm persuading you that it's a good thing I'm going to go with you. We're going to go to the doctor together. We're going to go to the hospital together. I'm not going to leave you. I'm here for you. And you could say that 1,000,000 times. Just say it as much as you need to say it. Don't leave them. And like Libby said, just take them. You may even need to convince a child if they've had significant trauma. They just might not think it's okay. They might hate doctors. I don't know. You might need to persuade them, but just say, this is going to be a good thing. They're going to help you, and I'm not leaving you. I'm going to be with you. Okay, so why is all this so important? Because child abuse and neglect prevention is suicide prevention. Okay, so when children go through the abuse and neglect cycle, they're more likely to be exposed to what we talked about earlier, that suicidal environment. If people who have been abused, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but people who have been abused, their rate of suicide is incredibly higher than people who have not. And so what you're doing right now, just simply by being here in this training, like you are doing suicide prevention, because you're going to be hosting kids, you're going to be welcoming families into your life, giving them healthy community, showing them how to work through emotions. And it's going to be preventative work, not just abuse and neglect prevention, but suicide prevention as well. So, okay. Any questions before we move on to self-care? I saw Liz is on the call, so she's ready to go, but take a couple minutes here to kind of just mentally regroup. Any questions, any thoughts before we move on? I know that's a lot to throw at you, so I don't, it's no small thing that you sit through that. Okay, well, on our training portal online, there's a ton of resources for suicide prevention. Also, we have the National Suicide Hotline number on our training website. Plug that into your phone. It's just a good thing to have. We have a magnet on our fridge here, so we always have it. And that's a good hotline to call with someone or for someone. If you need help, if we're not available, call the National Suicide Hotline, and they have people who are there 24/7 to walk you through whatever situation you're in. But there's a ton of other articles, maybe some videos on there. I can't remember what I put on there, but some good stuff if you want to learn more about suicide prevention. So, all right, great. Liz, are you on?
Yep.
Great. Do you want me to turn over the control to you so you can kind of click through? Or do you
Yeah,
want me? Great. All right.
we can do that.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing, and then
Perfect.
you should be able to start sharing. Let me know if you can't.
Yeah, let me pull up the slides.
Say if you guys need to, maybe we could take like a 5-minute break. If you guys need to run to the bathroom, grab a drink, or it's dessert time. If you need dessert, if you're a dessert person, you can do that. We'll take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at 7:27. Sound good? Great. Okay, see you guys in a bit.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Liz. I am the licensing specialist on the foster care side of things at Christian Heritage. So just want to introduce myself. I've been there for about 8 years. Self-care is super important to me. I'll kind of go into why as I kind of get through it. But I also think that this was paired as well as it could be with the really not super light stuff that you guys just went through. So because of all of that and because of the work that you guys are being called into, self-care is just super, super important. So I'm gonna just kind of go through this. So some of our points, we're going to talk about burnout and compassion fatigue, talk about the biblical perspective. I think sometimes there's, some question on whether or not self-care is biblical. And so we'll kind of look at what scripture says about caring for ourselves to care for others, and then look at some next steps as well. So to start, we'll talk about burnout. Burnout is characterized by the mental and physical exhaustion, depersonalization, and feelings of ineffectiveness that are often a result of the process of overextension and can be reversed with changes to one's self-care routine. So I think it's important to talk about, obviously we're all going to feel stressed at points, especially stepping into people's stories and hearing, maybe whatever's happening with them in their lives. But it's important to take those steps early so that we're not continually being stressed that will lead to burnout. And so burnout is just kind of this thing that happens when we haven't taken care of ourselves and we're continually pouring into others. So I know we've probably all heard the cup analogy. I was going to maybe do it for you all, but we're on Zoom and I'm packing up my house, so it just was not a good idea, right? But we all have a cup that only fills so much, and we're constantly pouring it into other people. The people we're pouring into sometimes have cracks in the bottom of their cup because they haven't necessarily been filled before and haven't been formed fully through the homes that they grew up in. And so not only are we pouring into this cup, but this cup is also leaking. And so it might take more energy to pour into some of our kiddos, their parents, whatever that looks like because of what they've experienced. And so we're having to pour more into them than maybe we would somebody who grew up in a 2-parent home with very minimal trauma. And so it's important to recognize that while we're pouring ourselves out, we have to have several people pouring into us. And you guys get to determine who that is and what that looks like for you guys. And we will go through something that will help us determine that in a little bit. So burnout can show up emotionally, physically, and mentally. It will start small, like I said. You'll start to feel exhausted at the end of the day or the week. And then if you take a step towards self-care, usually it can be remedied. However, if we haven't dealt with it, it can turn into a chronic condition that breaks down our mind, body, and spirit. This can spark feelings of excessive and ongoing fatigue, and this person may feel unappreciated or not appreciated at all. They can be angry, frustrated, and bored, and feelings of resentment may occur. So when I first started in the field, I was fresh out of college, had all of these ideas of, coming in and pouring myself out and, just making a really big difference. I think in this field, we're not always taught and we're not always encouraged to have boundaries and self-care. And I definitely wasn't at the beginning. And so I poured myself out and poured myself out and poured myself out and definitely got into this burnout cycle, which caused significant compassion fatigue for me. So while this can be interchanged kind of in our vernacular as burnout, this is actually just caused by prolonged burnout. So this is a form of caregiver burnout that stems from working specifically with traumatized people and is characterized by a diminished ability or lack of interest in being empathetic and compassionate toward others. Obviously, we got into this because we are compassionate people, but if we're continually pouring ourselves out and not filling up our own cups, our cup is empty. We have nothing else to give. And so it's really important to know, we can get to this point and it can be kind of scary. And so for myself, I got to this point, and really just like stopped having relationships with my friends. I would come home, like I would barely veg. Mostly I would just fall asleep and then get up and do the next thing the next day. I would go to work. I would kind of hold it together, but definitely wasn't able to connect with my kiddos nearly as well as I was before, or have the patience with the families that I was working with. So why does this happen? This is kind of built directly into what we do, right? So we're called to, as our CEO says, run into a burning building. So we're not necessarily called to like go run into the waves and have a good time. We're called to go save people. And so we're doing hard work. Usually the people who are doing this hard work are givers and not doers, but are not necessarily receivers. And so we're more likely to continue to pour ourselves out and less likely to ask for help in return. And so especially for a lot of us givers, it's hard for us to know specifically, like if somebody's like, hey, how can I help you? It's hard for us to like kind of take a mental like inventory and figure out, oh, this is what I need, right? Like we're always so used to giving, we're not necessarily in tune with ourselves to figure out like, oh, this is what I need to be able to get to a point where I'm able to continue to give. We also, as humans, most of our relationships are reciprocal. So we're usually getting and giving kind of in most of our relationships. However, in this field, we're giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And while we might receive a little bit in terms of like being able to see some growth or being able to see, some of those really happy moments that we're all into this field for, we can't receive necessarily in that reciprocal relationship. We also often bear witness to traumatic experiences, whether this be actually physically seeing them or just hearing them from kiddos and families that we care about. And so we're all probably super highly empathetic as well, which is again why we're here and why we want to care for others. But doing that is really easy to take on others' emotions, other experiences, others' feelings, and put them on ourselves to try to make others feel better. We can have limited resources, and again, we'll take on those needs due to a lack of training. You guys are with us and we want to offer as much support as we can. But again, if we don't know how to ask for help, it's hard for our staff to know how to help our families. And so it's kind of this cycle of trying to figure it out, asking for help, then pouring ourselves out again, being like, oh, I need help. So if we can stop that cycle earlier, we are better. And then we also may have some unresolved personal histories that can contribute to burnout. So I highly recommend everybody to kind of take like an inventory of themselves, their past, their histories, their experiences, and determine, hey, is there something that could trigger me with our kiddos? I guarantee you working with people is messy because we're all broken, right? We all come from some level of broken, but especially the kids that are coming into our homes because of whatever reason their parent can't support them at that moment. And so again, a lot of people who come into this field have something in their past that has caused them to be like, have that extra level of empathy for our kiddos. So some of my history, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 4.5 years old. So I went and lived with friends. I really didn't think it affected me until I got in the field. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm getting super triggered right now. So kind of think through your histories, your stories, figure out what might happen that could trigger some of those emotions, those experiences that you guys might have had in the past. And then start to work through those now, prior to when you have a child in your home who realize, and then you get triggered. So compassion fatigue and burnout can affect multiple levels, probably every level of a person. But the big ones are biological, psychological, and social. So biologically, it can be difficult for us to maintain tasks and prioritizing needs and decision-making. So we can call this decision paralysis. I know if I'm starting to get burnt out, like I will have my long list a mile long and I will have no idea where to start because I can't make the decision on what the most important thing is. That's my like first thing that I'm like, oh, okay, I need to stop and care for myself before this gets any further. You guys will learn that for yourselves. For every person, it's a little bit different. But just kind of start to take a little bit of an inventory about what this might look like for you guys specifically as I'm talking through this. Could also be biologically changes in appetite and sleep issues. So you could sleep way less. If you're super, super stressed, you could sleep way more. Again, if I'm like really far into burnout, I can't get up in the morning. Like I can set an alarm and be like, okay, I need to get up at a normal time. And then the alarm will go off and I am still just like exhausted and I cannot get myself to get out of bed. And at that moment, again, I know I'm a little bit further in this process than I thought I was. And so I need to take some steps back and really care for myself so I can start to care for others. And then difficulties with, job competency. So if you're at your office and all you can think about is what's going on at home, what's going on with your kiddo that's placed in your home or that family that you're supporting, that's also just a really big sign that something is going on too with your brain. Psychologically, we may experience depression, anxiety, be irritable, or have other mental health issues. Again, just that extreme emotional exhaustion. So especially if you're in that compassion fatigue, you're not going to really be able, you're kind of going to have a flat affect. And so you're not really going to be able to enjoy those highs as well. And you're also not really going to feel the lows as much as you usually would either. You may experience more anger, lower energy levels, and then forgetfulness as well. So again, for myself, I will be very, very far along the line if I like start a task and then I forget what I was doing. That is a very bad sign. At that point, I go tell my supervisor, hey, I need a couple of days off. I'm not doing well right now. So again, just make sure that you're also communicating this type of stuff if you're seeing some of this burnout or compassion fatigue with your Families Together staff so that they can jump in and help you guys as well, work through some of this and come up with some solutions for you guys. Socially, this could look like a loss of free time, friendships, and connectedness. You could have a diminished sense of personal achievement, feel depersonalized and alienated, and then have apathy. So back to my story, and I just am sharing just because I think it's helpful for people to hear it in like a real life situation. So I was a foster care specialist for about 2 years. I switched over to being a licensing specialist for about 2 years. But during that transition, I like got really bad brain fog. Like I felt like, those Claritin Clear commercials where it's like, everything's a little bit fuzzy and then like all of a sudden everything gets ripped off and it's Claritin Clear. I felt like right before everything got ripped off, like everything just felt fuzzy to me. And I really had a hard time trying to figure it out. I was like, was there something going on? Did I need to add some vitamin D into my life, whatever that was. And it really was just like, I needed to take better care of myself. And I got really bad at that point. But I was able to add some of these things that we're going to talk about to reverse this and get back to the point where I can care for others well. Okay, so the biblical perspective. So my church actually just did a little mini series on the Sabbath, and I re-listened to the sermons while I was doing this training. And this quote from our assistant pastor just really stood out to me. Sabbath is a gracious gift from God for the good of his people. And then Mark 2:27 says, and this is when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees. And then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So God really gave us rest on purpose, and it's for our good. So I'll have us watch this video. I think I clicked to share my audio, but if something weird happened and you guys don't hear anything, somebody let me know.
The number 7 is a big deal in the Bible.
Yeah, in biblical Hebrew, the word 7 is connected to the idea of fullness or completeness.
And that's something we all long for, but don't often experience. Instead, we find ourselves working endlessly, fighting back chaos with no real rest.
Yes. Now keep all that in mind as we turn to Genesis 1 in the Bible. It begins with darkness and disorder, but then God speaks to bring about light and order so that life can flourish.
And this happens over the course of 6 days.
Each day is marked with the phrase, "There was evening and there was morning." But on the seventh day, something special happens.
God stops and rests.
Right. Creation is brought to its completion on the seventh day. And that phrase, "there was evening and there was morning," it doesn't appear on day 7.
It's like a day with no end.
On the seventh day, God's presence fills his creation. The land provides for all of God's creatures, including humans, who are appointed to rule the world with God forever.
Kings and queens of the seventh day rest. I can get into that.
But the humans are deceived by a dark power, and they forfeit that rest. They're exiled into the wilderness, where they have to work as slaves to the land.
Until they die and return to the dust from which they came.
But God wants to restore humanity back to that seventh day rest. So he chooses to give the family of Israel that experience of ultimate rest so they can share it with others.
But how? They're in Egypt, slaves to an oppressive empire who's grinding them into the dust.
So God confronts Egypt and he liberates the Israelites, taking them through the darkness and chaos on the way to the promised land.
Now, while they're on their way, they find themselves in the wilderness. It's easy to get lost. Life is a struggle. They're not in the land of rest yet.
But while they're on the way, God invites them in the wilderness to start living as if they're in the promised land.
But how do you practice the future rest in the wilderness?
Well, God tells them that every seventh day they are to stop their work, or in Hebrew, to Shabbat, so that they can rest and enjoy God's good world.
So take a whole day to live as if the ultimate rest has already come.
Yeah, this is the Sabbath, celebrated every week on the seventh day. But there's more. The Sabbath is just one of 7 festivals that Israel practiced every year, each one anticipating that seventh day rest.
That is a lot of 7s.
And there's even more. Every 7 years, the Israelites were to liberate slaves, forgive debts, and let the land rest for a whole year. And then, every 7 times 7 years was the ultimate seventh day rest, called the Year of Jubilee. If anyone had lost their land or gone into debt, all was forgiven, everything restored.
Wow, so the Sabbath, these feasts, the Year of Jubilee, it's all pointing towards the hope of future rest.
Right. Now, when the Israelites went into the land, they forgot their God, and so they forfeited their chance for rest in the promised land.
They're exiled and enslaved again by an oppressive nation, led back into a world of chaos and disorder.
But Israel's prophets said that their exile would end one day, and that the ultimate jubilee of freedom and rest would come, but generations go by, and they're still waiting.
It's at this dark point in the story that Jesus appears, and he launches his public mission on a Sabbath day.
Yeah, he read aloud from the scroll of Isaiah, saying that it was time for all captives and slaves to be released because this was the year of the Lord's favor.
What did he mean, this is the year of the Lord's favor?
He was talking about the ultimate jubilee.
So Jesus is claiming that seventh day rest would come through him.
Right, he said that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, and he confronted disorder and darkness in all of its forms, liberating people from sickness, sin, even from death itself.
Yet, Jesus was killed, so even his work was undone.
Well, it seemed that way. But notice, Jesus timed his death to take place at the end of the week. His body rested in a tomb during the Sabbath, and on the 8th day, he rose from the dead.
Oh wait, the 8th day? You mean the first day of a new week?
Exactly. Jesus' resurrection was like the first day of a new creation, where God's light and life broke into the darkness.
So because of the resurrection, we have hope in God's promise of future rest. But we're not there yet. It's like we're still in the wilderness, where we experience struggle and pain.
But as we journey towards that ultimate seventh day, Jesus invites us to experience a taste of real rest now, by following him. Or in his words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."
Okay, so before we kind of go further, I want to acknowledge the true reason we can have rest is because we trust in Jesus. We trust in his finished work. We trust that God has everything in his hand, and true rest comes in our trust in that. However, we can still take steps to also rest and to be able to focus on that true rest and that trust that we have in Jesus. A couple of verses that I would like to point out, they read Matthew 11:28-30. Hebrews 4:9-11 says, "So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall away by the same sort of disobedience." Isaiah 26:3 says, "You keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you." Just a couple of places where we see Jesus also taking this rest and this, time away. Mark 6:45-47 says, "Immediately Jesus made his disciples get in the boat and go on ahead of him to I don't even know how to say it. Sorry, I'm not a pastor. When he was dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up to the mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on the land." We know this story as when Jesus walked on water, but I think we often forget that prior to this, he took time away, even from his disciples, to be alone with God and himself. Luke 22:39-41, "And he came out, as it was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you may not enter into this temptation.' And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed." Again, this is very, well known. This is when Jesus entered the Garden of Gethsemane to pray that God takes away the cup. But this verse says it was his custom to go to the Mount of Olives and pray and have that communion with his Father in that time away. I think it's also important he took people with him, but then he even withdrew further to be alone and have that time with his Father to recharge. And then Psalm 4:8 says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." So through this, there's commands to rest, and then there's also Jesus's example that he rested and he took time away to recharge and just be with his Father and be with reminding himself of his mission and why he was on earth. So now what? Brene Brown says, "Sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just show up." So not only show up for our kiddos and our families, but show up for yourselves and show up for your family. Self-care, again, is different for everyone. So I'm going to let Libby know that I'm going to call on her and kind of talk about her self-care at the end of this. It also starts with healthy habits. So the smaller we start, the better. Even if it's something as simple as I make my bed every morning, that gets my head in the right spot. Drinking your water, that can also help with your self-care as well. And then we're going to look at it from a biopsychosocial and spiritual approach as well. So biologically, again, starting small, drinking water. Don't only drink your coffee, don't only drink, your diet soda, whatever that looks like. Our bodies need water to live and function. And so make sure that you're getting, as much water as your body needs. And everybody's body is a little bit differently. Eat healthy snacks. Again, we're all running like from place to place to place to place. Make sure that you have time built in to eat those healthy snacks. Get your fruits, get your vegetables, get your grains, get your protein. All of that stuff our body needs in order to work well. God made our bodies that way on purpose. And so we need to nourish them the best way that we can. So again, those foods that nourish, make sure you're eating full meals, make sure that you are getting as many calories as you need. If you're anything like me, like if I'm stressed, I don't eat. And so I have to sit down and look and be like, okay, what have I eaten today? And how many calories do I need to get my body to where it can act and be recovered tomorrow? Exercise, go for a walk. Doesn't have to be a lot of stuff. You don't have to exercise for a half an hour even. Just go walk for 10 minutes. Do yoga like 20 minutes before bed to wind yourself down. Just really feel like you're in tune with your body and able to feel what your body needs from you. You can do something fun with the kiddos with exercise too. Have a dance party in the kitchen after dinner, after you've put the dishes away, get everybody's body moving, do what you need to do. Healthy touch is also super, super important. And so make sure that you have people around you who are giving you hugs, holding your hand. If you don't have that around you, I encourage you to find it or go get a massage. Just try to find some of that healthy touch. We're created for that. God created all of our senses on purpose. And then part of that is our touch. That decreases our stress level. It increases our endorphins. Very, very important. Also make sure you get sleep. So obviously 6 to 8 hours a night would be great. You know, that's not always possible. So if you need to power a nap in the middle of the day or like right before the kids get home or whatever that looks like for you guys. Power naps are not like your 2-hour naps where you wake up and you have no idea even what dimension you're in anymore. These are like your 20-minute naps that just kind of help your mind reset and get back to where you need to be. Psychologically, we're going to develop a mindset of well-being. Internalize that we're a person of worth and worthy of love and belonging, and also worthy of rest. So I think it's hard for us to really be like, well, I haven't done enough to deserve this rest. But that is not true. You have done enough and we need to rest. Get honest with our internal dialogue. Make sure that you're speaking positively about yourself. Work on affirmations, mantras, and gratitude. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think some of these like affirmations, mantras, gratitude, like kind of feels a little bit new agey to me, but they're not. They're super important that we have positive self-talk toward ourselves and not necessarily just thinking about all the things we haven't done. So develop a list of your positive strengths and attributes. God gave those to you, and it's okay to acknowledge them, because he gave them to you and it's a good thing. And so make sure you're leaning on those as well. And then write down and memorize like some scriptures that really affirm your worth. So these are some just really simple ones. Obviously scripture is chock full of these. And so if there are ones that specifically speak to you, put them up like on your mirror or like on your, when you're driving on your, whatever flips down and blocks a sun visor, that's the word, sun visor, wherever you can see them, to remind yourself of who you are in Christ, to remind yourself of what he has given you and what he has made you is obviously super important too. Again, we want to really watch our self-talk. So be aware of what you're telling yourself, pay attention and externalize it. So if you're saying negative things about yourself, sometimes even writing it down and then being able to point out like, hey, this isn't who I am in Christ. Christ made me this, and this is how I need to counteract what that was saying. So take ownership of what you're thinking, and then tell your brain to stop when what it's saying is negative. Choose a replacement or alternative thoughts, change the scripts. And so if you write down a negative thought in the next column, write down a positive thought. And again, you can go back to those scriptures that say who God says that you are. Socially, remember that relationships can both energize and drain us. There are times in our lives where we're going to be giving more, and then there are times in our lives where we need to be taking more. As weird as that feels. So make sure you're just kind of aware of where your energy is going and what's positive energy and what's negative energy. And especially when you are pouring yourself out for kiddos or families that you're working with or in your home, make sure that you're getting more energy than you're giving to other things too. And then know where to draw boundaries. So boundaries are super, super important. If you struggle with boundaries, I highly recommend the book Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend, or they have videos on their boundaries too. You can just Google or YouTube them and you'll be able to find them. And Ronnie will be leading the boundaries training next week. Perfect. Balance your calendar. So make sure you have nights at home. I'm really bad at this for a long, long time. I think COVID made me slow down and realize like, hey, I'm never home and I should change that. But prior to COVID, I literally was not home any night of the week. That is not healthy. So make sure that you're finding nights to be at home with your family or with your spouse or with friends or whoever that is, so that you're able to really reset and figure out where you are. And even if they're good things, like I was usually volunteering at church, but I still needed to put a little bit of a boundary in place and be like, I don't need to volunteer at church 3 nights a week. I can volunteer at church 1 night a week and still do what I feel like I need to do, but also take care of myself. So again, Ronnie will be talking about boundaries, but also make sure, like, when you don't have your families together, kids, or you're not supporting, their families, make sure that you're being able to be present with the people that are around you. Don't constantly put those who are already in your home or already in your life on hold for the ones that you're trying to serve. You need to keep those relationships central and important to you. Spiritually, we can read scripture, so soak in God's word and work, journal through a passage, and then read other books on God's character and his goodness. So when I'm really, really struggling, especially with burnout, I have a book that goes through each of God's attributes, and I find whichever one I feel like I'm questioning at that moment and just read through his attributes in scripture that really reaffirms who he is and how he's going to show up for us. Meditation and solitude. So find some time during your week to just remove distractions and pause and be silent. And just listen and just be in tune with yourself and be in tune with what the Holy Spirit is just trying to impart with you. Recreation. Find fun and fulfilling outside activities that refresh our bodies and allow us to experience the passion that God has inside of us. Get out into nature. I think, we can feel like things are so big, and then when we go out into nature and really realize how big God's creation is, everything else looks small, right? And so super important to just realign our lives with how big our God is. Again, that Sabbath. So intentionally set time aside in your weekly rhythm to dedicate to resting, nourishing, and restoring. I know that can't be a whole day sometimes, but this needs to be a priority. So if this could be, one morning a week where your kiddos can watch cartoons and eat some sugary cereal and you can go be alone and rest. Super important. Find joy and humor. So one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy. So find opportunities to grow and nurture our joy. And we can do that through practicing gratitude. So just writing down 5 positive or gratitude things a day can change the way that we see God, ourselves, and those around us, as well as transform our brain, and it will also impact us physically. So we're going to talk about self-care plans. I know that I sent these to the Families Together team, but part of your guys' homework is going to be to develop a self-care plan. I wish that somebody had made me do this when I started in the field versus 3 years into the field. So do this beforehand. You might have to change it as you get kiddos in your home. Maybe what you have planned for your self-care plan prior to kids is not going to be feasible after kids, but at least you have a place to start, and then you can figure out what's feasible after kids. So what was super important for me, I have 2 here. This one on the right just talks about things that fill my bucket, right? So I really like to lift weights. Physically, I really like to play softball, so that was really important for me. Emotionally is really important for me to be able to be in tune with with my emotions. So I'm definitely a minimizer. I like to push my emotions aside. They're not important. So I needed to give myself, 10 minutes a day to sit down and just be with my emotions. Socially, I put very specific plans in place, like how many times I need to make sure I see my friends, whatever that looks like. And then spiritually, the things that filled my bucket. So spending time in God's word each day, reading other books, listening to other pastors than just the one that I go to every Sunday, and then just miscellaneous activities that would fill my bucket. So I really like to get pedicures, more because of the massage that it gives my feet, less because of the actual pedicure, but that's one of the things I know, hey, that'll fill my bucket if I'm able to go. And then red flags. So again, when I talked through that first part of my thing, I know when I'm starting to hit my burnout point, and those are my red flags. So those are the things that I need to watch And when I feel those things happening to me, that's when I need extra self-care. So I would encourage each of you to fill that out. And then on this left side, we have a self-care plan. So this is stuff that's like every single day I'm going to make my bed. Every single day I'm going to drink as much water as I need to. Every single week I'm going to work out 2 times a week. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, but I'm going to get my steps in 2 times a week. Every month I'm going to go out to dinner with a friend. And then every year I'm going to take 2 weeks off of work and just unplug and do what I need to do to be able to come back. So again, that's going to look very different for everybody. But I very much think it's important to start that now. And then as you have kids, you can change what that needs to look like. Livy, will you talk through yours?
Yeah, and mine is kind of like I'm not as structured as Liz is, right? Like Liz has her really great structure that she stands by. And I'm a little bit more fluid in the realm of I make a list of these are all the things that fill my bucket. And I have to do so many things from that list within a span of a week. And I know what that is because I've practiced this so many times. It's a learning curve. So like some of the things that I do, and some of them are daily, right? So like daily, I wake up, and in the morning when I wake up, I just do like an inventory of what I'm feeling, right? And so it's sometimes like, this is what I feel, but this is what I know, right? Because sometimes we're not actually feeling, what we're feeling is never wrong, like what James said, right? Like the same with the kids. It's how we're feeling, but it might not actually be truth for that day, right? So counteracting whatever I'm feeling with like truth that I know about how God feels about those things. And then I love music, whether that's worship or just like upbeat music. So sometimes that means that I'm blaring that while I'm in the shower or dancing in the kitchen while I'm making a meal. But again, just thinking through what are the things that fill your bucket. I'm an introvert, but I like people, and I know that I need people. And so I schedule in intentional time, like deep life-giving time with my people, which isn't weekly by any means, right? But I at least every other week, I need to be knowing that I have a time frame with somebody who's going to just pour into me a little bit too, right? Like a both way sort of relationship, but not somebody that I'm feeling like I just have to give the whole time. Somebody who will just like meet me where I'm at. And it might be that we're honestly just sitting quietly beside each other, but just having another human that you're like, oh yeah, you get this. This is great. Outside, that one, I grew up on a farm. And so being outside is just immediately calming to me. That's one of those things like where your body keeps the score, right? Like my body goes outside and it's like, okay, yep, we're okay. And again, your guys's might be totally different. I love reading, whether that is both obviously my Bible or other books. Sometimes that is books where I'm like, oh, I want to be thinking and learning. Sometimes that's, I need something that is mindless because it has been overwhelming and I need like a fun fiction, easy read, like a beach read, right? Think like, what are you going to read on the beach? Sometimes I need those. I definitely surround myself with pictures or words that I know that I need to hear. So like, what are the messages that I know that I need to hear? I know what are the lies that I frequently believe. And so like one of those things I have it on a picture in my bedroom and it is finished, right? So frequently, because of how I was raised, I'm always like, oh yeah, I've got to earn my salvation in some capacity, right? But like Jesus didn't say like it's kind of sort of almost halfway done if you do X, Y, and Z, right? No, like it is finished. So I do that. Sleep, I have to try to be really intentional about the amount of sleep that I get. Sometimes I'm better at that at other times. This one's different, not one that we talked about in any capacity, but when my house is in chaos, I feel like my life is in chaos. And so organization or cleaning, Like if I'm setting aside intentional time, that brings peace to me. So even if you're like, oh, this doesn't feel like self-care, like it is so peaceful. If that's your thing, right? Like not everybody's thing. And then moving your body. So I love running or basketball or yoga, walks, any of those types of things. Trying to think if there's anything else that are my main go-tos. Those would be a lot of mine. And then sometimes, right? Like sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I need to be doing something monthly. So tomorrow it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off for me. I'm doing just a whole bunch of really fun things that I've packed in a day because I just need a little bit of time off from work, right? So just packing it all in. So sometimes you're like, no, I just need that break. And that could be where you, as a husband and wife combo, just like, hey, I'm going to tap out for the day and I need you to handle the things because I need 4 hours to myself to go to Target without the children. Whatever that looks like. That's mine.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, that is what I have. James?
I was just going to say, you guys can find these PDFs on the training notes website. And so under week 3, there will be a link to access this, the PDF. So I was going to actually add one more thing for Sue. And if this is the last one, you can stop sharing your page, Liz. For Susan, I was thinking as you interact with parents, let me change my view here so I can see you all. Like this will be a great thing for you to use with parents as an advocate, because a lot of people who grew up in traumatic backgrounds, or maybe they didn't have both parents at home, they saw probably one parent working all the time, parenting all the time, never getting a day off. And so it's a way for you to coach them, for how to care for their whole body, right? Their whole body, their whole soul, how to shop for the right groceries in order to be able to function well throughout the day. So yeah, powerful stuff. Thanks, Liz. That was awesome. Like I put in the chat, I love mowing the lawn. That is so, I love looking at a freshly mown grass and I'm like, this is awesome. And I feel so at peace and so rested. So I get to mow the grass tomorrow, by the way. I'm so excited to mow it. But everybody has their own thing. And I think, Liz said it well, and Libby too at the end, like whatever your thing is, but you just have to plan to do it well. Because if you don't plan now, you won't do it when you host kids, or you won't do it when the kids go back home and, you get back into your normal routine and you're just like, okay, I'll just back to the grindstone. It's like, well, take time, take a little time today, take one day a week, take some time each year. And whatever it is that fuels you, do that. One thing I was going to share is it's a book about anxiety. I bought it because I wanted to learn about people who struggle with clinical anxiety. And then I learned a lot for myself. So it's a book called Finding Quiet by J.P. Moreland. And he's actually a professor at Talbot in LA seminary. He had a massive anxiety attack and didn't know what was going on. And then in the succeeding months, he found out what had happened. And so he basically chronicles his journey. And really what it is a book about self-care. It was a book. It was his story of how he began. And I just lost the page. I had this quote I was going to read you. He talks about how he began to care for himself holistically, all the things that Liz just talked about. And there was this fantastic quote in here. I just shut the book as I showed you the picture. Here it is. He quotes a psychologist who defines self-compassion. And I love what he says here, what she said. Self-compassion is treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would a friend. And then he writes, she goes on to say that people who struggle with self-compassion do not necessarily lack compassion toward others. Rather, they hold themselves to higher standards than they would expect. of anyone else. And it really goes back to what Liz said at the beginning. I love the way you put it. You're like, the people who care for kids and vulnerable families that get into this kind of work, like, we're just like go-getters, right? We're like, I'm just going to get it done and I'll rest when I'm dead. Well, that's probably not the wisest way to go about it. And so it's like, you have all this empathy for other people, but you actually don't have any empathy for yourself. You're just like, I'm just going to grind it out. But we won't last very long if we don't do that. So thank you, Liz. That was awesome. If you guys have any questions and you want to get in touch with her, we can connect you to her. And certainly you could talk more about that with us as well. But please do that self-care worksheet planning activity this week or next week. It's going to be invaluable for you as you go forward to have that down. So, well, any thoughts from tonight? Any questions for Liz while you got her here? She won't be on the call next week. So if you have any questions about self-care, you can ask her. Any other thoughts, comments? No, you guys are an easy group. All right, switch gears here. Any questions about anything that you're working on for hosting in terms of becoming a host home? I see some of you have gotten like background checks in. That's really awesome. That's great. Any other things that you're working on that you need help with?
Hi, okay, so we are not able to attend next week. Sorry to take up everybody else's time with this. But then after we re-listen to the recordings, then where will it tell us on the recording what to do next? As far as home visits or?
Yep. Yeah, we'll mention that all next week. And so, yeah, you guys are more than halfway done. You just got one more. Awesome. We'll talk about all that next week. Libby will be the one to do that kind of final home visit / inspection / interview to make sure this is something you really want to do. That'll happen once your home study or your self-study. If we say home study, it's the same thing. Sometimes I call it a home study. Sometimes I call it a self-study. I notice Libby does the same thing. So once you do that self-study online, then we'll be able to say, okay, we're going to schedule that time where we can get out to your house and do a walkthrough, make sure all those safety things are taken care of, answer any more questions you have, ask questions ourselves based on your self-study. If there's things we want to dig into a bit more, we want you to tell us more about that, we'll ask you that there. So yeah, we'll talk about all that, but we'll also reach out to each of you individually. If you're, if we notice, oh, you said you wanted to host, but you didn't do your background check, like we'll check in with each of you to make sure, all your T's are crossed and all your I's are dotted. So.
Sounds good.
Incredibly long answer to that really simple question. My wife would have said, stop talking. Anything else? No? Okay. Great. Well, yeah, next week will be our last Zoom training. Ronnie's going to talk about boundaries. So expanding a little bit on that segment Liz mentioned. And then I hope that our CEO, Roy, will be with us to talk about something called the 40 developmental assets. And those are, as I mentioned the first week, qualities that kids need to thrive. Roy helped develop some material on that subject when he was with Focus on the Family. A lot going on for him right now. He said he would do it. I'm going to hold him to it. I hope he can get on. If not, I'll step in and pinch hit and do it. But I hope he's on the call next week to walk through that, to give you that framework for kind of how, as we go down the road, we're going to measure, success and child flourishing in families together. So, pardon me. All right, well, I'll pray Jen, again, thanks for sitting in on the training. Liz, thanks for doing self-care training. Appreciate you all. But I'll pray and let you go. Jesus, we thank you for what you're doing in each of our lives. And I thank you especially for the people here who want to say yes, or at least exploring how to care for vulnerable children and families in order to communicate the love of God to them through their hospitality. I praise you, God, that you're working in their lives in order to be your instrument of love and compassion and tenderness and care to people who probably have not experienced that. And even if they have, they find themselves in a really tough spot where they need someone to help. And we can be that. We can be just a tool in your hands to help people in need. And we're blessed to be able to do that. And so as these people here continue to process all the training we're going through, as they continue to discern and to wrestle through, God, where do you really want them, and what do you want them to be doing with families together, with Christian Heritage, with vulnerable families? Would you give them wisdom? Would you give them direction? Would you give them a sense of your presence with them? Would you give them a sense of your peace, that they're right where you want them to be? And that even if they don't know the future, which they don't, even if they don't know when they'll host a child, or if they will, which they don't, that you are present with them and that you're walking with them through this process. So we thank you for them. Obviously, Christian Heritage couldn't do what you put on our hearts to do without them. And so we thank you for their hearts, for their time, for their energy, for their resources that they're giving, that they're pouring out to serve. Thanks for our night, Jesus. We pray that you would be with us and bring us back here together next week. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, everybody. Thanks. We'll see you next week.